Paris. November 12, 1993. On the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, the glass door of a small classical music shop opened with the quiet chime of its bell. Two men walked in. One wore a deep forest green corduroy jacket over a mustard yellow round-neck sweater, dark charcoal trousers, dark brown leather boots, a dark navy flat cap pulled low over graying brown hair. Johnny Hallyday. The other man was tall and angular, 61 years old, wearing a deep burgundy wool overcoat over a pale cream turtleneck, dark grey trousers, black Oxford shoes, thin silver-framed glasses, a worn brown leather briefcase in his left hand. His name was Henri Solier, a retired concert pianist who had performed in 17 countries and recorded 11 albums for Deutsche Grammophon between 1961 and 1988. And who now spent his mornings walking the 8th arrondissement with the particular unhurried quality of someone who no longer had anywhere to be at a specific time, and had made his peace with this. Neither of them had been recognized on the street that morning. The caps and the ordinary clothing had done their job. They had met 40 minutes earlier at a café on the Avenue Montaigne, old friends. The particular friendship of two people who have known each other long enough that they do not need to explain why they are meeting or what they will talk about. They had drunk their coffee and talked about nothing specific, and then Henri had said, "Let's walk." And they had walked, and halfway down the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, Henri had stopped in front of a small display window. Inside the window, a handmade violin on a velvet stand. Behind it, a grand piano in dark rosewood. Above the window, a small brass plate. Maison Marchand. Instruments classiques depuis 1962. Henri stopped, looked at the piano through the glass. "That is a 1921 Erard," he said. "I played one of those in Brussels in 1974. Let's go in." Johnny looked at the window, then at Henri. "I know nothing about classical pianos," he said. Henri was already pushing the door open. "You don't need to," he said. "Just look." The shop's owner, Gilles Marchand, was behind his counter studying a Brahms score when the bell rang. He looked up. Gilles Marchand was 53 years old. He set his glasses on his nose the same way every morning and combed his grey hair back with water from a glass and opened his shop at 9 o'clock precisely because precision was what he believed in. 25 years ago, he had applied to the Paris Conservatoire's piano department and been rejected on his second attempt. After that, he had never touched a piano key in seriousness again. The shop he had built from a single inherited room into the 8th arrondissement's most respected address for classical instruments was his compensation. His argument made daily in rosewood and brass that he understood music at its highest level, even if he had not been permitted to produce it. The instruments in Maison Marchand told you everything about Gilles Marchand's beliefs. A 1921 Erard grand piano, a 1934 Mittenwald violin, a 1908 French cello by Émile Laurent, a 1920s German viola, a small collection of early 20th century wind instruments in glass cases. No electric guitar had ever entered this shop. No amplifier, no microphone. "This is a place for serious music," Gilles told people who asked. "Anyone looking for entertainment can find something on the Champs-Élysées." He had said that sentence several hundred times. That morning he would say it for the last time. He looked at the two men who had walked in and applied his 30-year assessment in 20 seconds. One looked like an aging artisan, green corduroy jacket, mustard sweater, flat cap. The other was more promising. The briefcase, the turtleneck, the quality of the overcoat suggested someone with education and money. But the first man, the cap, the boots. Zuul completed his assessment and stepped from behind the counter. "Welcome, gentlemen," he said, his voice courteous in the way of someone performing courtesy rather than feeling it. "Is there something specific I can help you with?" "Just looking." "Thank you," Johnny said. He walked toward the Erard and ran his fingers along the lid without touching the keys. Beautiful instrument. Gilles watched his hand on the wood with the particular attention of someone watching a stranger touch something they love. 1921, he said. Original action. The owner brought it from Lyon in 1958. 140,000 francs. Johnny nodded, looked at the piano, didn't say anything else. Henri had moved to a glass case at the back of the shop containing a small collection of old scores and manuscripts. He opened his briefcase and took out his glasses and leaned close to the glass. "Extraordinary," he said quietly. The moment Gilles heard Henri's tone, the tone of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at, his assessment shifted. The other one, the cap, the corduroy, he was the tourist. But the man with the briefcase was worth engaging. He moved toward Henri. "The manuscript in the center case is a handwritten faux étude," he said. 1897, authenticated by the Bibliothèque Nationale in 1987. Henri looked at it without turning around. "Which étude?" he said. "Opus 52, number 3, said Gilles. "The one in D-flat." Henri turned from the case. His thin, silver-framed glasses caught the shop light. "In your opinion?" he said. "Which recording of that étude is definitive?" Gilles felt something he had not felt in a long time. The particular pleasure of being asked a question he could answer completely. "Samson François," he said. 1959. The Pathé recording, not the later one. The 1959. The rubato in the middle section is something that has never been equaled. Henri nodded slowly. "I played that étude in Hamburg in 1971, he said. François' recording was the reason I learned it." Gilles looked at him. "You are a pianist." "Was," said Henri. "Retired." Then he said his name. Jules Marchand looked at Henri Saulnier for a moment. Then he looked at the 11 Deutsche Grammophon albums he had in the private storage room behind the counter. 11 albums he had owned since 1964. The particular expression of a man who has been conducting himself one way and has just received information that requires him to recalibrate. He recalibrated quickly. He was good at that. Johnny had moved to a chair near the window and was sitting with his flat cap pushed back slightly on his head, looking at the shop around him with the quiet interest of someone in a place they know nothing about and find interesting for exactly that reason. Gilles looked at him, then at Henri, then back at Johnny. "And your companion," he said, "is he also a musician?" Henri started to answer. Johnny answered first. "I sing," he said. Simply, the way someone states a fact about themselves that is neither boast nor apology. Gilles looked at him. The corduroy jacket, the flat cap, the mustard sweater. "What kind of singing?" said Gilles. "Rock and roll," said Johnny. "Mostly." Gilles put his hands together in front of him. The gesture of someone composing themselves around something they have decided to say. "Rock and roll," he said. He said it the way someone repeats a word in a foreign language they find mildly offensive. "I respect all choices, but singing, true singing, requires 30 years of formation, breath control, resonance technique, the architecture of the phrase. Schubert's Winterhase is singing. What happens in stadiums and on commercial radio is something else. It is emotion without discipline, volume without structure. It is the collapse of the voice into noise." He said this with the tone of someone delivering a considered professional opinion. Then he said the specific thing. "Forgive me for being direct. But rock music in particular puts people to sleep. Not literally. Mentally. It asks nothing of the listener. It rewards nothing. It is pleasant at best. Wallpaper with a beat." The shop was quiet. Henri had turned from the manuscript case and was looking at Gilles with the expression of someone who has heard something they know is wrong and is deciding what to do about it. Johnny was sitting in the chair near the window. He had not stiffened. He had not flushed. He had not moved at all. He was looking at Jules Marchand with the same quiet, interested expression he had been wearing since he walked in. Then he smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a hurt smile. A genuine smile. The particular smile of someone who has just received information they find more interesting than insulting. He said, "What is your favorite Schubert?" Gilles Marchand was not expecting that question. He had delivered that particular assessment to various people over 30 years and had received various responses. irritation, defensiveness, the slightly wounded dignity of people who took their popular music seriously and did not appreciate being told it was insufficient. He had a practiced response to all of these. He did not have a practiced response to someone asking about Schubert. He answered. He said that his definitive Schubert was the Winterreise cycle. He said that Fischer-Dieskau's 1951 recording with Gerald Moore was, for him, the highest point in the history of vocal music. He said that the song Der Liamen, the final song of the cycle, was in his view the most perfectly constructed piece of vocal writing in the Western tradition. 12 bars, almost no harmonic movement, everything in the voice. Johnny listened to all of this. Then he said, Der Liamen, the hurdy-gurdy man. At the end of the road, everything lost. Just the drone of the instrument and the cold. Gilles looked at him. Yes, he said, exactly that. Johnny said, there is a song I recorded in 1974. Most people have never heard it. It was never a single. It was the last track on the second side of an album that sold badly. It is 2 minutes and 40 seconds. No drums after the first verse, just voice and one guitar. It is about a man standing outside a window in winter looking at a life he used to have. It asks something of the listener. I don't know if it rewards it, but it asks. Gilles looked at him. Henri had quietly set his briefcase on a chair and walked to the air rod. He lifted the lid with the particular care of someone who has lifted many piano lids and knows how much force is appropriate. He sat down at the bench, looked at the keys for a moment. Then he looked at Johnny across the shop. Johnny looked back at him, the same wordless conversation that 40 years of friendship produces, a single look that contained a question and an answer simultaneously. Johnny stood up from his chair, took off his flat cap, set it on the chair. He walked to the center of the shop. There was no microphone. The shop was small and quiet. Gilles behind his counter, a middle-aged woman in a burgundy coat who had been looking at the violin in the corner and had stopped looking at the violin. A young man in a pale blue jacket near the wind instruments, who had turned his head. Henri's hands found the opening of the 1974 song on the Erard's keys. The first chord, not Schubert, not Deutsche Grammophon, not Fischer-Dieskau, something else. Something that had been recorded in a small Paris studio in 1974 by a young man who had been told by a record label director 14 years before that he was a copy of something that already existed. Johnny closed his eyes. What happened in Maison Marchand in the next 3 minutes has never been officially documented. Johnny Hallyday never mentioned it in interviews. Henri Saulnier mentioned it once, briefly, in a conversation with a journalist in 1997, and declined to elaborate. The middle-aged woman in the burgundy coat has never been identified. What is known is this. Johnny Hallyday sang the 1974 song in a classical instrument shop on the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré without a microphone, with Henri Saulnier at a 1921 Erard grand piano behind him, to an audience of 4 people including the shop's owner. His voice was not technically perfect. It had never been technically perfect. Gilles Marchand was right about that, as he would acknowledge later. The breath control was not conservatoire breath control. The phrasing was not Fischer-Dieskau phrasing. But there was something else. Gilles Marchand noticed it 6 seconds into the first verse. He noticed it the way you notice when the temperature in a room changes, not with your mind but with your body. The particular physical awareness of something shifting in the air around you. The weight of a life in the voice. Not technique, not training. Something that 30 years in a conservatoire record collection had not prepared him for, and could not have prepared him for. The specific gravity of a voice that has been carrying something for a long time and is carrying it now, in this room, without apology or performance, simply because the song requires it, and the song is being sung. The young man in the pale blue jacket near the wind instruments did not take out his phone. He took a half step forward. The woman in the burgundy coat lowered the violin she had been examining onto its stand without looking at it. Gilles Marchand put both his hands flat on the counter and stood completely still. At the end of the second verse, Henri played the moment where the drums had dropped out in the 1974 recording. Just the piano. POU, 2 minutes and 40 seconds of a man standing outside a window in winter. When it ended, nobody moved for 4 seconds. Then Honfru lifted his hands from the Erard keys and closed the lid gently with the particular care he had used opening it. Johnny opened his eyes. The young man in the pale blue jacket was the first to understand. He pulled out his phone, not to film, not to post. He opened a search page, looked at the screen, looked at the screen, looked at Johnny's face, looked at the screen again. Then he showed it to the woman in the burgundy coat. She looked at the screen, then at Johnny, then at Henri. She brought her hand to her mouth. "That's Johnny Hallyday," she whispered. "And that's Henri Saulnier." The whisper did not reach Gilles Marchand behind the counter. It did not need to. Gilles Marchand had understood before the song ended, before the second verse, in the 6th second, when the temperature in the room changed, and his 30-year rule began its quiet collapse. The expression on his face was the expression of a man who has been certain about something for a very long time and has just been shown gently and without malice the exact dimensions of what his certainty had cost him. Johnny walked to the counter. Henri followed, briefcase in hand. Gilles wanted to say something. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. Johnny said it for him. He said it simply and without triumph. "You were right about the technique," he said. "Every word, breath control, resonance, phrase structure, all of it. I have been singing in front of audiences for 33 years, and I still cannot tell you with certainty whether I do any of it correctly." He paused. "But technique is the road," he said. "It is not the destination. The destination is the moment the temperature in the room changes. You felt it. I saw you feel it. That is what music is for. All music, not just Schubert, not just Fischer-Dieskau. All of it." Gilles nodded. His voice, when it came back, was smaller than it had been 20 minutes earlier. "I did not know who you were," he said. Johnny shook his head. "That is not the point," he said. "The point is that it would not have mattered if you had." The woman in the burgundy coat asked for an autograph. The young man in the pale blue jacket asked if he could shake Henri's hand. The third customer, who had been near the wind instruments, simply said "thank you" to both of them and meant it completely. As Johnny and Henri moved toward the door, Henri stopped and looked back at Gilles. "The Forêtude," he said. "Opus 52, number 3. If I come back next month, do you have a piano I can practice on?" Gilles looked at the 1921 Erard. "It has not been played properly in 11 years, he said. "Come back whenever you like." Henri nodded. Then he and Johnny walked out onto the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. The grey November morning. The ordinary street. 2 men in ordinary clothing walking back into a city that did not know they had just been somewhere. 3 months later, Gilles Marchand moved a small upright piano from the storage room to the front of the shop. He put a sign on it in his careful handwriting. The sign said, "For anyone who wants to play." It was the first time in 31 years that an instrument in Maison Marchand had been placed there for anyone rather than for someone specific. He never explained to customers why he had done it, but Henri Saulnier came back in December as he had said he would, and in January, and in February. And on the third visit he brought someone with him, a young woman of 22 who played the piano and had been rejected from the conservatoire on her first attempt and who needed somewhere to practice. Gilles gave her the key to the shop. She came every Tuesday morning before the shop opened. She used the 1921 Erard. She was careful with the lid. Gilles never charged her. He told her once when she asked why, that someone had recently explained to him the difference between the road and the destination, and that he was still working out what to do with that information. She did not know what he meant. She thanked him anyway. And here is what this grey Tuesday morning in November 1993 on the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré leaves all of us. A man who had spent 30 years building a fortress of correct opinion around himself said the wrong thing to the wrong person in a small room. And the wrong person, in a dark navy flat cap and a forest green corduroy jacket and a mustard yellow sweater, did not argue, did not deploy his fame, did not walk out. He sat in a chair and asked about Schubert. And then he stood in the center of a room with no microphone and sang 2 minutes and 40 seconds of a song that nobody in that room had heard before and changed the temperature. That is all he did. That was everything. Because the right response to someone telling you that what you do puts people to sleep is not to explain why they are wrong. It is to do the thing, in the room, without a microphone, and let the temperature change on its own. And have you ever been told that what you do is not enough? Not by a stranger, by someone who sounded certain? Tell us in the comments, because these are the stories that remind us that certainty is not the same as knowledge, and that the room always knows the difference.